in consultation with the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. Dear Excellencies, colleagues, participants, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I want to inform you that the Swedish chairpersonship has arranged a live stream of the event. The stream is embedded on the OSCE public website, that is www.osce.org/live during the sessions. Dear participants, before we start the meeting, I strongly urge you all to respect the time limit of 3 minutes for your statements. By doing so, we're allowing as many as possible to participate and contribute to the deliberations. I will also reserve the right to make delegations aware of the time limit should they exceed it. Statements and recommendations can be submitted to the OSCE Secretariat at documents@osce.org for distribution to participants. And if possible, if you have your statements ready, please send them in advance to facilitate the interpretation. On a technical note, I want to draw your attention to the fact that we have interpretation to the Russian language. I kindly ask all participants to mute the microphone when not speaking, turn off your video conference camera to save internet bandwidth, and leave capacity for optimal sound quality. Although mobile devices like smartphones or tablets are supported, the preferred method should be using laptops to connect. In case your session connection drops, just re-click the link in invite to reconnect. I will now hand over to our technical host, who will run a short presentation regarding the technical details of this Zoom meeting. I'll be right back. Nu är inte de med.
Just one more moment, please. Okay. Dear participants, the ICT section of the OSCE Secretariat has been asked to provide necessary information to facilitate an optimized online meeting experience. An important aspect for an optimal sound experience is that participants use a headset, ideally with echo cancellation. This is the best practice to avoid a majority of audio quality issues. Please note that important features such as interpretation are only available if you are connected through the Zoom desktop client, which can be downloaded on the Zoom website, zoom.us, under resources for each supported platform. If you need to leave the meeting and wish to rejoin later, you will access it again through the waiting room. Admittance to the meeting is managed by the meeting organizers who should be contacted in case of meeting access issues. A common issue is that you appear with a name that is not compliant with the agreed naming convention. Please refer to the renaming guide included in the information package. You can additionally browse to zoom.us/test to check your name's appearance in a test session. Participants are urged to remain muted with the camera disabled at all times during the meeting, except when taking the floor. This will ensure the best sound quality possible for all meeting participants. Your camera should be activated as soon as you have the floor. Should a participant wish to ask for the floor during the course of the meeting, you can do so using the chat function. Please send a message in the chat to 001 speakers list by selecting the name from the list in the chat pane. The technical host of the meeting, which can be identified by the text label host in brackets, can be addressed to answer technical questions, not floor requests. If you wish to share the screen content with the audience, you are kindly requested to approach the meeting organizers via the chat function first. You will then be assigned the co-host role, which is necessary to be able to share the screen. If you plan to share video content, please make sure to select Share Computer Sound and optimize screen sharing for video clip in the sharing dialog. To access interpretation, which is today offered in English and Russian, participants can click on the appropriate language channel in the menu at the bottom of the screen. It is recommended that you keep the language channel of your preference activated during the whole meeting, while not using the option to mute the original language. This will enable you to use interpretation automatically whenever provided to your language, while listening to the original audio should a statement be delivered in your language. In case of any technical problems during the course of today's meeting, the chat function can be used to promptly inform the technical host so that remedial action can be attempted. Thank you for your attention. I wish everyone a pleasant meeting.
Thank you very much. Dear Excellencies, colleagues, participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to open the Swedish OSCE Chairpersonship expert meeting on combating anti-Semitism in the OSCE region. The program with the agenda for the next coming 2 afternoons have been sent to all registered participation prior to this meeting. An updated version is also available on the website of ODIHR and on the Swedish Chairpersonship. That is www.osce.org/press. Dear participants, I want to warmly welcome you to these 2 afternoons, where we will discuss how we can enhance and strengthen the fight against anti-Semitism and all forms of intolerance and discrimination by applying a comprehensive approach, sharing best practices and working together. We will have 2 sessions comprising of 2 impressive panels of experts. They will discuss current challenges related to anti-Semitism in the OSCE region and the responses by states to these challenges. Together, we will examine how states can prevent and effectively combat anti-Semitism in the OSCE region. I encourage participating states, representatives from the Jewish communities and other religious communities, as well as non-governmental organizations, to contribute to our deliberations and please ask questions. I am convinced that we will all learn and get inspired by the interventions, the suggestions, and the recommendations made. Let us move to the first item of our agenda, the welcome address by the chairperson in office of the OSCE, the Swedish Foreign Minister, Ann Linde. I have the pleasure of introducing the chairperson in office of the OSCE, Foreign Minister of Sweden, Ann Linde. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ulrika. Your Excellencies, national envoys, expert coordinators, and representatives of civil society. Let me start by welcoming you to the Swedish OSCE Chairpersonship's expert meeting on combating anti-Semitism in the OSCE region. The meeting is held in consultation with the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. I'm happy that the new ODIHR director, Matteo Mecacci, is with us today. I want to take this opportunity to introduce my personal representatives working with tolerance and non-discrimination. It's Rabbi Andrew Baker, personal representative on combating anti-Semitism. Thank you, Rabbi Baker, for your role in preparing today's meeting and the role you have had for several years. Ambassador Mehmet Pakaci, personal representative on combating intolerance and discrimination against Muslims. And Associate Professor Regina Pollack, personal representative on combating racism, xenophobia, and discrimination, also focusing on intolerance and discrimination against Christians and members of other religions. I want to thank you for taking part in this expert meeting. Your efforts to strengthen focus on tolerance and non-discrimination are highly valuable. These issues constitute an important part of the OSCE concept of comprehensive security, on which OSCE shared commitments and principles are founded. A few days ago, on the 27th of January, the world commemorated Holocaust Remembrance Day on the 76th anniversary of the liberation of the death camp Auschwitz-Birkenau. This annual commemoration honoring the victims and survivors of the Holocaust is a reminder of the horrific crimes committed against such a horrific number of victims. The Holocaust holds universal meaning forever. We say and mean never again. And that commitment means action and accountability. That state must honor their international human rights obligations and obligations under international humanitarian law. That we must address racism, xenophobia, and all forms of intolerance every day systematically to ensure accountability for crimes committed. The purpose of this expert meeting is to discuss common new challenges in combating anti-Semitism and possible comprehensive and preventive responses by participating states and civil society. I hope that sharing of best practice among a broad spectrum of actors will inspire participating states to adopt new and effective measures to strengthen the fight against anti-Semitism and to combat racism and intolerance in all its forms. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, when I presented the priorities for Sweden's chairpersonship to the Permanent Council in January, I said that my first priority as CIO will be to focus on our common principle and joint commitments. Let me address a few of the commitments that the participating state of the OSCE have made on anti-Semitism. OSCE participating states have committed themselves to respect freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief. They have jointly condemned anti-Semitism. We have also long recognized that anti-Semitism poses a threat to stability and security in the OSCE region and committed ourselves to common efforts and to comprehensively address anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is one of the oldest forms of hatred. Despite decades of concerted efforts to eradicate this ugly and dangerous threat, it's still with us and on the rise again. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have witnessed a surge of hate speech, such an incitement to hatred and violent acts online and offline. Jews have even been accused of being responsible for the pandemic. Anti-Semitism is a direct threat to Jews, but we must not be borne by Jews alone. It is a threat to us all and to our democratic and open societies. When anti-Semitism occurs, no matter who expresses it, we must stop in and expose it, confront it, condemn it, and combat it. It is our collective responsibility to stand up for each human being's human rights. It is important that states adopt special targeted measures to protect individuals from violence, discrimination, and expressions of hostility motivated by anti-Semitism. In 2004 in Sofia, participating states committed to combat all hate crimes, which can be fueled by racist, xenophobic, and anti-Semitic propaganda. The OSCE OD recently published its hate crime reporting of 2019. The reporting indicates a spike in recorded hate crimes incidents based on racism and xenophobia. Some 1,700 anti-Semitic hate crimes were reported in 46 participating states, reflected in the report. It is clear we must do more. In Sofia, we also committed to collect and maintain reliable information and statistics about anti-Semitic and other hate crimes. Just as a surgeon cannot remove a cancer or prescribe a medicine without documenting nature, scope, and extent of the disease, we need to map how widespread anti-Semitism is in the respective countries to take appropriate action. And for this, we need reliable, disaggregated data in sufficient detail. To better target the specific context of each expression of anti-Semitism, we need to develop better indicators to ensure that statistics reported by states are comparable. In Athens in 2009, all participating states committed to promptly investigate all hate crimes, as well as to ensure that the motives of those convicted are acknowledged. Participating states also agreed that hate crimes should be publicly condemned by the relevant authorities and by the political leadership. It is crucial to train police and prosecutors on how to recognize and respond to anti-Semitic hate crimes. I therefore welcome ODIHR's targeted training programs and tools for stakeholders, including for law enforcement. Among other things, they are designed to improve police skills in recognizing, understanding, and investigating hate crimes. The EU Commission has recently published a handbook for the practical use of the non-legally binding AIHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, which can assist in this important task. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, states must take all appropriate action to ensure the safety of their Jewish communities, starting with holding regular consultation between law enforcement agency and Jewish communities, and provide additional security measures when necessary. As the attacks in Halle or Vienna has shown us, radicalization more frequently now happens behind the four walls of a home. It becomes a very difficult task for the law enforcement agencies to detect such lone actors, and crisis management becomes important. A joint security and crisis management initiative by the Scandinavian countries can perhaps serve as a source of inspiration. It is important to take preventive actions, among them awareness raising, outreach, quality education efforts, and programs for social cohesion and integration. Holocaust education must target both the general population, school children, and youth. It should include visits to memorial sites. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Swedish government is strongly committed to the fight against anti-Semitism and to strengthen international cooperation in the field. This meeting is an important step in this direction. Also, as many of you already know, Prime Minister Löfven is hosting the Malmö International Forum on Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism in October this year. Tomorrow, Ms. Karin Wallensten, State Secretary to the Prime Minister Löfven, will give you more information about the Malmö Forum. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, violence, discrimination, and expression of hostility motivated by anti-Semitism are serious obstacles to the enjoyment of the right to freedom of religion or belief. The Commission of Anti-Semitic Hate Crimes engage the obligation of states under international human rights law to protect Jews against violations. We should promote a broad-based coalition consisting of participating states, Jewish communities, civil societies, other faith-based actors, regional and international organizations to combat anti-Semitism. We should also start addressing this ancient phenomenon for what it is, a global human rights challenge. I look forward to hearing your ideas, proposals, and recommendations on how we can strengthen the fight against anti-Semitism in the OSCE region. I hope you will have fruitful discussions during these 2 days. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Foreign Minister, and thank you for taking your time and for your wise word and for lending support to this expert meeting. I now give the floor to Rabbi Andrew Baker, the Chairman in Office Personal Representative on Combating Antisemitism. Most of you already know him. He's been with us since 2009. He is the Director of International Jewish Affairs at the American Jewish Committee, which he joined in 1979. Throughout the 90s, as Director of European Affairs, Rabbi Baker promoted tolerance in the emerging democracies of Central and Eastern Europe. He's also active in Holocaust restitution issues, and as I mentioned, since January 2009, he's been the CIO's personal representative on combating anti-Semitism, and I ask him to take the floor. Please, Rabbi Baker.
Ulrika, thank you very much for this opportunity. Let me, at the outset, thank the chairperson in office, Minister Ann Linde, for organizing this meeting, and Minister Linde for the powerful statement you made at the very beginning of this, signaling the chairperson and Sweden's commitment to fighting this eternal scourge we face. This meeting today follows an OSCE tradition established in previous years of holding conferences on combating anti-Semitism in proximity to International Holocaust Commemoration Day, which we observed last week. One of the most important ways we can pay our respects to the victims of the Holocaust is to stand in solidarity in combating the anti-Semitism we face in the present day. And let us make no mistake, it is still very much with us, as reflected in recent Odir hate crime data. This meeting provides us with the opportunity to assess the current situation, to identify the multiple sources of the problem, and to devise the tools and measures necessary to address it. We face multiple sources of anti-Semitism today. Let me enumerate them. We know that anti-Semitism is a motivating ideology of white supremacists, neo-Nazis, ultranationalists, and other elements of the extreme right. Many are animated by conspiracy theories about Jewish control. Lone attackers, such as those responsible for the murderous incidents in Halle and in Pittsburgh, say such views inspired their actions. Many of the rioters who invaded the US Capitol only a month ago were motivated by anti-Semitic views. In more mainstream nationalist movements and parties across Europe, we often find anti-Semitism as the common thread woven together with anti-immigrant and Islamophobic agendas. Second, we have seen the evolution of an anti-Semitism on the left, where Israel is demonized and its very right to exist is challenged. Jewish communities have become surrogate targets. Hostility toward Jews is thinly veiled behind a mask of anti-Zionism. This became pervasive in the British Labour Party, for example, affecting Jewish party members and the larger British Jewish community. Third, we note that both the 2013 and 2018 Frost surveys of European Jews reported significant anti-Semitic incidents coming from those holding strong Islamist views. Surveys carried out in France and the UK have shown that Muslims in these countries have a higher degree of anti-Jewish prejudice than the rest of the population. This may derive from the negative views of Jews in the countries from which many European Muslims emigrated. It may be the result of conditions inside Europe. But we recognize that even minority groups that are themselves victims of discrimination are not free from prejudice as well. Fourth, even as Holocaust remembrance ceremonies increase, there are those who deny or distort its very facts. It is particularly repellent when it occurs in those countries where Jews themselves are primarily Holocaust survivors or their descendants. Prominent figures in Central and Eastern Europe disregard or excuse the culpability of nationalist leaders at the time, celebrating them as heroes despite their complicity in the murder of Jews. One recent example came from the chair of the Lithuanian Parliament's Historical Commission, who proclaimed the innocence of such fascist leaders while asserting that Lithuanian Jews themselves were actual perpetrators of the Holocaust. And lastly, we see efforts in some OSCE participating states to limit or ban altogether certain long-standing Jewish and Muslim religious practices. In the name of animal welfare, states are passing legislation that prohibits kosher and halal slaughter. There are popular movements urging a ban on infant and child circumcision. They claim this religious practice is a form of child abuse, even though this ritual, known as Brit Milah in Hebrew, has been carried out by Jews since biblical times. Parliaments in Iceland, Denmark, and Finland have debated legislation to outlaw it. Proponents of these measures may not be anti-Semitic, but something can be anti-Semitic in effect, if not by intent. These measures, in fact, pose a threat to the future of Jewish life in those countries. Now, with an understanding of these multiple and varied threats to Jews and Jewish communities throughout the OSCE region, let us focus on what we must do to combat anti-Semitism. Let me summarize what measures we have available. First, to fight anti-Semitism, we must define it. The IRA working definition of anti-Semitism, as the chairperson in office noted, does this with clear examples. It is a valuable educational tool for those monitoring and responding to anti-Semitic and other incidents of hate, including police, prosecutors, and judges. It has been adopted by close to 30 national governments and employed by scores of national, regional, and local authorities throughout the OSCE region. Second, comprehensive, disaggregated hate crime data are essential, and commitments by participating states to collect them are among the most important of OSCE decisions. They help us identify the locations and the sources of anti-Semitic incidents necessary for effective and timely government response. Third, opinion surveys and focus research provide us with a picture of the overall environment. They allow us to gauge the general level of anti-Semitism. They tell us what Jews themselves are experiencing, and they help identify segments of the population where that prejudice is most acute. Fourth, we recognize the need for special security measures to protect Jews and Jewish community institutions. Previous OSCE conferences and ODIHR's Words into Action guides have delineated the necessary measures that must be taken, including enhanced policing and additional funding. Best practice examples now offer steps that can be replicated with some assurance of success. Fifth, interreligious and intercultural dialogue foster greater understanding between and among religious and ethnic communities. Cooperative activities serve to break down barriers and shatter prejudicial stereotypes. As our societies become more religiously and ethnically diverse, and at times even more isolated among these divisions, these exchanges are even more important. Sixth, at critical moments when legislation threatened to ban circumcision altogether, political leaders have so far stepped forward, but large percentages of the population still support such legislation, and they are not persuaded by arguments of religious freedom. We need to find effective ways to address and change this public opinion. Seventh, education matters. More can be done to educate about the history and contribution of Jewish communities in national life. We have long recognized the importance of Holocaust education, but as time passes and as the eyewitnesses to the Holocaust pass away, we see that fewer and fewer young people today have even a basic knowledge of those events. This must be corrected. Finally, we have all come to recognize that so much of what goes on, of what spreads anti-Semitism and group hatred, and of how we will combat it, takes place in the world of social media and the internet. It allows us to do so much that is possible, like this very conference, but it is also a powerful force for spreading hatred and conspiracy theories and creating virtual communities for some of the worst anti-Semites and extremists to inhabit. It must be addressed in every measure we take. I look forward now to the discussion which follows and to the recommendations from the experts who are assembled here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Baker, for your very succinct recommendations. I now have the pleasure to give the floor to the new director of the OSCE's Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, ODIHR, Mr. Matteo Micacci. He was appointed on the 8th of January 2021. Matteo Micacci is a doctor in international law from the University of Florence. Previously held positions are president of the International Campaign for Tibet, and he was also head of mission of the OSCE ODIHR Election Observation Mission to the presidential elections in Georgia in 2013. He has been a member of the Italian Parliament, the Foreign Affairs Committee, and the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE between 2008 to 2013. Mr. Micacci, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rika, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Minister, for also your welcome in my new position. Excellencies, distinguished experts, ladies and gentlemen, it is really a privilege and honor for me to join all of you on behalf of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. At the outset, please allow me to express my sincere gratitude to the Swedish Chair in Office for organizing this important event, which ODIHR was very honored and happy to support. This meeting constitutes another milestone in our long-standing efforts to support OSCE participating states in countering anti-Semitism and bears witness to the urgency of the work we must continue to undertake in this critical area. OSCE participating states, as it has been mentioned, have repeatedly condemned anti-Semitism and other forms of intolerance and discrimination, beginning with the 1990 Copenhagen document. They've also recognized for a long time that anti-Semitism poses a threat to stability and security in the OSCE region, and for this reason committed themselves to common efforts to combat anti-Semitism. Despite our best efforts, however, the events of last year have yet again demonstrated that anti-Semitism continues to find new and fertile ground to flourish across the OSCE region, most notably through digital technologies. These facilitate the rapid spread of incitement to discrimination, hostility or violence, as well as conspiracy theories and age-old disinformation about Jews through anonymous, automated, and unregulated networks of hatred. As our report on OSCE human dimension commitments and state responses to the COVID-19 pandemic pointed out, the pandemic has exacerbated pre-existing discrimination and intolerance and fueled instances of incitement to hostility or violence, conspiracy theories, and scapegoating. Toxic narratives espoused by state and non-state actors in certain participating states have emerged, blaming Jews and other communities for the spread of the virus. Online Holocaust memorial commemorations, religious services, classes, and other events have been disrupted in various ways, including through the display of Nazi symbolism and anti-Semitic slurs. Anti-Semitism that goes unchallenged encourages societies to believe that prejudice and active discrimination towards particular communities or even attacks against them are acceptable. As historical and recent events have clearly demonstrated, such beliefs generate both immediate and long-term threats to overall security. And it is my firm belief that we have to do all we can not to repeat the tragic errors of the past. This is why I believe that the focus of the two themes of this expert meeting, the first one, enhancing the security of Jewish communities through effective crisis management, and the second, building broad coalitions to address anti-Semitism, is so critical. Allow me to begin with security and crisis management. As you may be aware, in 2017, ODIHR published a practical guide on understanding anti-Semitic hate crime and addressing the security needs of Jewish communities. This publication provides governments with effective measures and practices that can be implemented in cooperation with Jewish communities to better address their security needs. It also analyzes how anti-Semitic hate crimes affect, for example, differently men and women. Since its launch, this publication has been translated into 13 languages and further customized into the domestic context of 3 OSCE participating states. As he points out, one of the most important factors in ensuring security is building trust between governments and Jewish communities through consultation, cooperation, and coordination. For this reason, this year, under the auspices of the second phase of the Words into Action project, that was also mentioned by Rabbi Baker, our office intends to hold awareness-raising events in 10 OSCE participating states. These aim to facilitate meaningful and lasting communication and coordination between the authorities and Jewish communities to work hand in hand in recognizing and addressing anti-Semitism in all its forms. Secondly, let me turn to the theme of building broad and effective coalition to address anti-Semitism and other forms of intolerance and discrimination. And many of you who are here today have been working for a long time on building these coalitions. Let me say that these ambitious goals cannot be accomplished in any large measure by just one group acting on its own. It requires the combined efforts of many communities and organizations with different skills, experiences, and resources. We have long recognized this, and the pandemic has only reinforced our view that the need for international collaboration is more critical than ever. ODIHR has, for example, very strong cooperation with UNESCO on developing educational material on anti-Semitism. Fortunately, in recent years, a considerable range of interfaith and interreligious dialogues and partnerships have emerged. Civil society coalitions, including religious or belief communities and faith-based organizations, have also been created to address anti-Semitism and other forms of intolerance and discrimination. Therefore, it is now time to intensify efforts to involve state and many other relevant actors, such as civil society groups, religious or belief communities, national human rights institutions and equality bodies, academia, educational professionals, the media, private companies, including businesses, in the collective quest to combat anti-Semitism. I strongly believe that ODIHR, with its strong mandate to facilitate, and I quote, cooperation between government officials and civil society on issues related to anti-Semitism, end of quote, and its ability to bring together diverse actors across divides to build confidence and to spur common action can effectively contribute within the international community to spearhead this approach. We must all recognize the dangers of inaction and work closely together in addressing anti-Semitism through the fields of Holocaust remembrance, hate crime, security, education, and support to civil society in the years ahead. Therefore, I encourage all of you to call upon ODIHR's practical assistance and support at this critical time. And in closing, let me also wish all of you a fruitful and productive discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy, and thank you for your wise words. I would now like to move on to our next point, namely our first panel discussion. Let me introduce the moderator and the panelists who will discuss how to prevent anti-Semitism and enhance security for Jewish communities through effective crisis management, sharing best practices. As moderator, we have Ifat Barakshani, who is the Director for International Affairs at the World Jewish Congress. Ifat has an LLM from New York University and Hebrew University, and she is admitted to the New York Bar Association. She has worked at the International Center for Transitional Justice and has a very long and diverse experience and expertise in international humanitarian law and human rights work. On the panel, we have Ambassador Abdrahmanov, who is the new OSCE High Commissioner for National Minorities since December 2020. Ambassador Abdrahmanov holds a degree in history from the Kazakh National University. Before taking up his position as High Commissioner, Ambassador Abdrahmanov was actually ambassador to Sweden and Denmark. He joined the Kazakhstan's Ministry for Foreign Affairs in 1993. He was the foreign minister from 2016 to 2018, and prior to that, twice deputy foreign minister. From 2013 to 2016, he was the permanent representative to the United Nations of Kazakhstan, and he has also served as ambassador to Austria and to the State of Israel. Regina Polak, associated professor, who is also the CEO personal representative on combating racism, xenophobia, and discrimination, also focusing on intolerance and discrimination against Christians and members of other religions. She heads the Department for Practical Theology at the Catholic Theological Faculty of the University of Vienna. She's an expert and an internationally recognized scholar and lecturer on interdisciplinary research on socio-religious transformation processes in Europe, religion in the context of migration and urbanization, and interfaith dialogue, with a special focus on Jews, Christians, and Muslims, including research on racism and other forms of group-related hostility. I also have Ambassador Mehmet Pachachi, who is the personal representative of the chairperson in office on combating intolerance and discrimination against Muslims. Ambassador Pachachi is a career diplomat and a university professor. He has served as ambassador to the Holy See, and previously he acted as Director General of Foreign Relations in the Presidency of Religious Affairs in Ankara and as attaché of the Presidency of Religious Affairs at the Turkish Embassy in Washington. I also have Katarina Visvaldova, who is a policy analyst at the EU Fundamental Rights Agency. She has a long experience of working as program officers and seconded national expert, working on research, capacity building, and technical assistance on racism, hate crime and hate speech, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim hatred. Before joining the the FRA, she worked as policy officers in the social inclusion, research on immigrants in Prague, and on Roma pupils in the Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs of the Czech Republic. I also have Johan Tunnell, who is the Chief Security Officer of the Danish Jewish community, key member of the Swedish National Organization. Here he is representing the Nordic Jewish Security Council, which has a responsibility for the safety and security of Jewish communities in the Nordic countries. He has over 25 years of experience in the security field. And finally, I have Jonathan Boyd, who is the Executive Director for the Institute for Jewish Policy Research. He has a Bachelor of Arts from UCL London Global University, and since 2009, he's the Executive Director of the Institute. I now give the floor to Ifat. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ifat Barak-Cheney, and today I will be the person reminding you to unmute your microphone when needed. I'm speaking from snowy New York, so I hope that my communications will be stable amid the stormy weather, and I also hope that all our participants and our live viewers are well and healthy. Thank you to the chairperson in office of the OSCE for organizing this expert meeting on combating anti-Semitism in the OSCE region, and for the CIO personal representative on combating anti-Semitism, Rabbi Andrew Baker. Thank you also to Ambassador Sundberg for putting this meeting together and entrusting me with the moderation of this first session. While it is unfortunate that we must still devote so much attention to anti-Semitism in 2021, it is as important and highly appreciated that many organizations and states are making concrete efforts to maintain this topic on the agenda. This first session will focus on prevention of anti-Semitism and enhancement of security for Jewish communities through effective crisis management. And I think our very diverse panel will be able to provide insights and recommendations on prevention in its broadest terms, on reporting, enforcement, security, and crisis management. I will first give the floor to the speakers for their opening statements, after which we will open to participants for interventions and questions. Thank you. Our first speaker will be Ambassador Kairat Abdrahmanov, the OSCE High Representative for National Minorities. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Toda rabba, dear Ifat, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the Swedish chairpersonship for organizing this expert meeting on addressing anti-Semitism. We are all aware of the important role that Sweden plays in our work against anti-Semitism, and I witnessed myself as in my previous position in Stockholm. And it is heartening to learn that so many of the issues that Her Excellency, Madam Chairperson in office, highlighted in her speech today are also the priorities of my institution. And I welcome this opportunity to address this unique audience of experts and share my thoughts on a topic that, despite the lessons of history, continues to be of grave concern in the OSCE region and globally. As you may know, the function of the OSCE High Commission on National Minorities was established in 1992 to address tensions and prevent conflicts involving national minorities. Just 1 year later, the OSCE participating states invited, I quote, the High Commission on National Minorities in light of his mandate to pay particular attention to all aspects of aggressive nationalism, racism, chauvinism, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism, end of quotation. This entails protecting and promoting diversity as an inherent part of my mandate. Today's meeting testifies once again to the importance that the OSCE places on addressing anti-Semitism. Its timing is symbolic. Last week, we marked International Holocaust Remembrance Day. That is why today the imperative of never again should be accompanied with a promise of zero tolerance for anti-Semitic discrimination and anti-Semitic acts. Remembering the victims of the Holocaust and learning from it requires that we take concrete prevention measures that lay the foundation for and help build lasting cohesiveness in our societies. Today, as never before, all OSCE participating states should reiterate their understanding and agreement that peace, security, and development can only be durable when it is grounded in tolerance and integration. Despite the commitments and measures taken by the OSCE family to root out anti-Semitism, it remains a pressing minority rights challenge. We are seeing incidents of anti-Semitic violence rising across the OSCE area. Bluntly speaking, even the current pandemic is reviving ancient prejudice and stereotypes and giving them a new spin. This trend is of great concern to all of us and to my office in particular. Dear friends, please allow me to share with you some practical preventive actions based on my institution's experience. First, we must actively stand together against discrimination, stereotyping, and anti-Semitism by sharing positive and inclusive narratives. I would like to put an emphasis on actively. We all know that indifference and inaction can lead to mass atrocities and genocide. If we really want to prevent discrimination, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism, we need to take a long-term approach and tackle the root causes. My institution has published 9 thematic recommendations and guidelines over the past 25 years, and I would like to draw your attention to these important documents. They cover thematic areas such as education, language, participation, media, policing, and access to justice as they related to minorities. They provide general principles that states can adapt to their local contexts and use to develop legislation and policies that improve the situation of minorities and interethnic relations in general. Education, as it was rightly mentioned by previous distinguished speakers, is our most powerful tool in promoting positive narratives and countering stereotypes, hatred, and ignorance. In our advice to participating states, my institution emphasizes the importance and value of including teaching about human rights, minority rights, and tolerance, and promoting diversity and pluralism in school curriculums. Education has a powerful role to play in teaching the next generation how to avoid stereotyping and embrace diversity. It can help our society avoid the dangers or inherent in our us and them narratives. We also recommend that states take initiatives to build young people's resilience to resist extremist ideologies and prejudice. Raising awareness and teaching the skills to avoid stereotyping should not be limited to schools. We recommend that states conduct awareness training for policymakers and law enforcement personnel. And youth should not just be considered as a target group for national policies and programs. They can and should be at the forefront of our long-term conflict prevention efforts. Education is also an important component of the imperative of remembrance. This leads us to a trend we see that emphasizes the differences and distances between ethnicities and states. We see that often where political disputes emerge over what we remember and what to forget. These narratives also overlap with ethnic divisions. This can result in minorities feeling that their historical experience is not adequately reflected in official narratives. Such perception can be closely linked to the painful processes of digesting past traumas. I would like also to draw your attention to the Hague recommendations regarding the education rights of national minorities and encouraging participating states to include teaching about the histories and cultures of their national minorities in the general compulsory curriculum, as it contributes to strengthening understanding, tolerance, and mutual acceptance within the state. The genocide did not begin in the gas chambers. It began with words. History teaches us that we have to recognize hate speech and hate crimes as clearly early warning signs in order to prevent atrocity crimes. History also teaches us that we have a clear responsibility to address hate speech wherever we encounter it. And quite recently, in February 2019, my institution published the Tallinn Guidelines on National Minorities and the Media in the Digital Age. And this document provides states with practical advice on how the media, and in particular digital media, which is so important in current circumstances, can be harnessed as a powerful tool for preventing conflicts and building resilient, integrated societies. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by saying that the prevalence of anti-Semitism, together with racism, xenophobia, and other forms of discrimination in our societies, are clear warning signs that we need to do much better in managing diversity and supporting integration processes in our multi-ethnic societies. We need to commit strongly to taking concrete action against anti-Semitism and all other forms of discrimination. That is why today I'm hopeful that we can take this opportunity to build an expert coalition and to provide government officials, parliamentarians, and representatives of civil society with concrete recommendations and advice on how to prevent and counter anti-Semitism, with a special emphasis on the role of youth in this process. Once again, I welcome this initiative of the Swedish OSCE chairpersonship, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for a very broad and interesting view of prevention. One of the things, I'm sure we'll unpack some of the things you've noted in our discussion later. I now turn to Dr. Regina Polak, who is the CIO personal representative on combating racism, xenophobia, and discrimination, also focusing on intolerance and discrimination against Christians and members of other religions. Please.
Thank you, Ifat, for your introduction. Dear Chairpersonship, Your Excellencies, dear Rabbi Baker, dear representatives, and dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to congratulate you on this especially important expert meeting, which contributes to combat anti-Semitism, which affects and threatens the lives of Jews in the OSCE region. This conference is also an important element to meet the many challenges around racism and all forms of intolerance, including intolerance and discrimination against Muslims, Christians, and members of other religions, and the need for a comprehensive approach to prevent and eventually eradicate these phenomena. Anti-Semitism is a unique phenomenon that is currently manifesting itself in many forms in all societies in the OSCE region. We see anti-Semitism coming from extreme right-wing groups, in parts of the left, and in violent Islamist extremist environments. It appears in the form of conspiracy theories on social media and in the denial and distortion of the Holocaust, as we heard. It connects with global conspiracy theories, demonizing the Jews into overpowering enemies, and takes on the function of the other and the excluded in social discourses. I think it is necessary to understand this uniqueness as well as the varieties of forms of anti-Semitism to be able to combat it. Samuel Salzborn therefore states that anti-Semitism is not only a form of prejudice, xenophobia, and misanthropy or racism. It is a cognitive and emotional system that aims at an ideological universal claim, blaming anything inexplicable and incomprehensible in politics and society on the Jews. During the COVID-19 pandemic, as we heard, this definition was confirmed. Jewish communities were targeted by anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and scapegoating related to COVID-19 and various other expressions of anti-Semitism, including hate crimes. Simultaneously, anti-Semitism underscores wider trends of intolerance towards other groups, including discrimination and racism against Muslims, Christians, members of other religions, migrants, minorities, and persons with respect to sex, gender, ethnic, cultural backgrounds, or any other status. OSCE reports show that the pandemic added new layers of complexity to this already difficult task of combating racism, intolerance, and discrimination. Additionally, these developments must be seen in the broader context of rejection of religion and minorities as such, as well as in the context of the social, economic, and political tensions that occurred during the pandemic and will probably increase. In this context, anti-Semitism can be seen as an alarming signal for both the erosion of solidarity, social cohesion, and conviviality, and a threat of humanity as such. A historical approach reveals that increasing anti-Semitism very often was associated with the decline of human values such as dignity, equality of people, and justice as a social design principle, especially in times of socio-economic crisis. So reflecting anti-Semitism today, it can be seen as a threat to democracy and human rights. Therefore, it is a challenge for the implementation of the comprehensive concept of security and peace of the OSCE. I want to highlight the common approach and the necessity of joint activities to combat anti-Semitism. As many of us are living in increasingly more polarized societies, solidarity and cooperation are crucial for peace building and security. I would like to emphasize 5 exemplary points. First, we should support and foster the adoption and the use of the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism. As Rabbi Baker said, it is important in helping the police, prosecutors, and judges in their work. It is a helpful tool for civil society in their own monitoring work and in educating a wider public audience. It is equally valuable to social media platforms as they are being pressed to address anti-Semitism in cyberspace. Second point, I want to repeat the necessity to focus on the young generation. We should take a closer look at the new concepts of Holocaust education that have been further developed in pedagogy and raise the awareness for the connection between anti-Semitism, racism, and all forms of intolerance and discrimination, especially with a focus on how they threat the recognition of plurality, one of the core values of democracy. Third, as already said, but I highlight it again, we should strengthen education on understanding anti-Semitism as a unique reality, but also as a phenomenon that is a threat for the whole society, for democracy and human rights. The excellent work of ODIHR already mentioned on this issue should be made more visible and promoted in students' education at universities and colleges, in teacher education, in civil society education, and media education in the participating states. Fourth, as the OSCE participating state committed to in Porto 2002, we should stress the positive role of multicultural and interreligious dialogue in creating better understanding among nations and peoples, recognizing the responsibility of participating states for promoting tolerance and non-discrimination, and further promote multicultural, interethnic, and interreligious dialogue in which governments and civil society will be encouraged to participate actively. One of the most effective tools combating anti-Semitism on a daily basis are encounter, dialogue, and cooperation. Fifth, last but not least, members of different religions and ethnic communities should stand up for each other. Christians, Muslims, and members of other religions should combat anti-Semitism together. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Polak, and especially a topic that has already come up a few times about standing up for each other. I'm sure we will also discuss with the experts we have today. I now give the floor to Ambassador Pajaji, Mehmet Pajaji, CIO, Personal Representative on Combating Intolerance and Discrimination Against Muslims. Ambassador Pajaji, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ifat. Excellency Minister Ann Linde, the 2021 chairperson, dear Excellencies, colleagues, and dear participants. It's getting harder for members of minority communities to live in countries where xenophobia is on the rise. In the OSCE region, there is an increase in the reports of xenophobia, hostility, discrimination, and violence originating from antisemitism, which is also termed as the oldest hatred and prejudice. According to studies, a considerable part of the Jews in Europe do not feel safe. As UN report, a special reporter on freedom of religion or belief, Ahmed Shahid, states that anti-Jewish incidents create a climate of fear among Jews. Also describes anti-Semitism as a global phenomenon. Jewish communities consider their freedom of religion or beliefs is violated. The threats faced by Jewish communities in many places compel them to take comprehensive security measures for places of worship, schools, and other religious and cultural sites. In fact, this situation should be seen as an outcome of an attitude of othering and spread of negative stereotypes and prejudices in the first place. Antisemitism has undoubtedly been one of the earliest manifestations of this kind of othering attitude that stigmatizes and marginalizes the members of a certain religious community by developing a certain hate speech. It can be taken that all kinds of manifestations of discrimination stem from the same xenophobic and racist stance. The tradition of old anti-Semitic rhetoric sets an example for other manifestations of discrimination today. Although anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred, for instance, belong to different historical frames of reference, it can be said that anti-Muslim hate rhetoric bases on the same stigmatizing attitude as anti-Semitism. Hate-filled anti-Semitic discourse repeats classic narratives today that characterize Jews as powerful conspirators, as well as immigrants, Muslims, or Roma. This discriminatory discourse manifests itself in different ways in every field of life and spreads to other social areas in waves. Starting from politics, media, as well as social media, it spreads to all social areas and even motivates violence, and finally also shows its effect in the area of legislation. For example, some legislative measures exceed to violate the right of freedom of religion or belief of Jewish communities by denying their right to practice their beliefs. As also mentioned by Rabbi Baker, adopting measures to prohibit of circumcision of boys or the traditional kosher or halal slaughtering animal for food production purposes can be given as examples of this phenomenon. Fortunately, as a good practice of dialogue between different religious communities, Jewish and Muslim civil society organizations cooperate to regain the right to practice their religion. Essentially, the hate speech that discriminates any religious community can feed the discriminatory stereotyping of members of other communities as well. An example of this is seen in the anti-Muslim hate speech and behavior, making anti-Semitic ones more visible again in the OSCE region. The extremist discourse eventually recalls the old stereotype as regards the origin of Jews and Muslims together. The aims of the anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim attitude of the far-right politics based on a discriminatory stereotyping hate speech targets the values such as democracy, human rights, equality, freedom, and pluralism. The anti-Semitic or any kind of discrimination against Muslims or Christians are different manifestations of the same distorted mentality and poses a threat to democracy. The discriminatory and xenophobic speech and policy against various minority religious communities, which are heavily exploited as propaganda subjects, particularly before every democratic election campaigns, paradoxically target the foundations of democracy. Perhaps as a first step, an analysis of the centuries-old history of discrimination and othering mechanisms against Jews and cultural accumulation of stigmatizing other minority communities with negative stereotypes would be useful to prevent further discrimination and social polarization. Knowing the mechanism of stereotyping and that of the producing of hate speech used by anti-Semitism in the past and today, and raising awareness of individuals through education against them can have a profound effect on combating new discrimination cases and hate crimes. This means preventing wrong at the source. It will only be possible to preserve freedom, democracy, and human dignity by more and more individuals stand against hatred with the awareness of these inalienable human values. As to combating discriminatory crimes, it is clear that monitoring, recording, and reporting anti-Semitic hate crimes are the first essential steps in combating discrimination and intolerance. However, data collection on hate crimes and harassments motivated by anti-Semitism is still limited, and hate crimes and incidents are still underreported. It's important that civil society is involved and work with the OSCE participating states to strengthen efforts to monitor, document, and report hate crimes and other acts of anti-Semitism, because these documents justify the effective training programs of the OSCE and ODIHR in combating hate crimes, namely prosecutors and hate crimes training program and the training against hate crimes for law enforcement program that are successfully conducted by the OSCE and ODIHR for police, prosecutors, judges, and civil society to confront hate crimes. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ambassador Potacci, and for also reminding us of the core issues of anti-Semitism and other hatred and anti-Muslim hatred, which I'm sure we will also touch on. I now give the floor to Ms. Katarina Visvaldova, who is a policy analyst with the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, good morning. Many thanks for having the Fundamental Rights Agency in this meeting. I have prepared a small presentation, which I will try to share now with you. I am going to, in my 5 minutes, I hope you can see it, to unwrap a little bit what is the situation with data on anti-Semitism, what do we mean by data, and how the data collection actually can be improved. Since 2004, the agency has been collecting information on how anti-Semitism manifests across the EU. It can manifest as in a form of an anti-Semitic hate crime. It can be discrimination and incident of harassment. We pull this information together, so how the states capture it, and then also how the civil society organizations capture it, what information do they record. We pull it together, and every year we publish this blue report that you can see on the slide, where we analyze the numbers and we try to understand the message behind this. I will explain this a little bit in my next slide, but I would just conclude that over the 16 years since the agency has been monitoring manifestations of anti-Semitism in the data, there has been very little progress progress regarding the quantity and the quality of the data that the states collect, despite the increased focus of policies and political attention to the issue as well. I can conclude that the picture remains patchy and the figures fail to capture the lived reality of Jewish communities across the EU. That is why it is so crucial that states organize surveys among Jewish communities in which they actually ask self-identified Jews about their experiences with hate crime and discrimination. The FRA had, together with JPR, conducted such survey in 2018. But in my presentation, I'm going to focus on the official data collection. So what you see now is a small excerpt from what we have in the report, actually. What you see that there should be another column with the states, which I don't think it's necessary for you to see. This is important to see the variation between the different numbers, the years as the numbers as the years go, and also the different types of acts and incidents and offenses and threats and conviction. This is the recorded data column. So the states have their own categorization and definition which they are using when they are recording and collecting these statistics. Some of these meet the threshold of a criminal offense, but others do not. So it's really a mixture basically of everything. Two things to add to that. The low numbers or in existence numbers are not credible and are not a reliable indicator that anti-Semitism is not an issue of concern in that state. We know from the FRA surveys, for example, that anti-Semitism is widespread across the EU in all areas of life. So what we actually want to see when we work with the states on how they can improve the data collection is increase in the numbers. Because the higher numbers of recorded anti-Semitic incidents can demonstrate that there are considerable efforts by a state to make the incidents visible in their recording, that they encourage victims and witnesses to come forward and report their experience to the police. So the high numbers reflect improvement, efficiency of the recording system that are in place, increased willingness of victims to report the incidents. They also signal improved capacity of authorities that they deal with such incidents accordingly. So overall, in 2021, just very few states in the EU have a very solid or have data available that are such quality that the data can actually be used in policing or policy making. That's the meaning of the data. They should be used. Where the data exist, you can already see it also from this table. They are not comparable. As I said, the states are using different methodologies and different sources. So there are two. This is a simplified division, of course, but the underlying factors behind such situation are two. It is because victims and witnesses do not report their experiences, not only to police, but to any other organization. And it's also because of the problematic responsiveness of the system. By the system, I mean police officers and the recording systems. These two areas are, of course, inherently interlinked. Why people don't report what happened to them? Just few numbers from our FRA survey. We asked victims of hate crimes and hate harassment if they reported the incident. As you can see, more than 1 in 2 did not report the last incident of anti-Semitic violence anywhere. That includes police. And when we ask why, 64% say that they don't believe that if they report the incident, it would change anything. So this also points to a high normalization of harassment and abuse. 36% say that the reporting procedures are inconvenient, meaning they are too bureaucratic and time-consuming, and 25% lack trust in police. So the ramifications are multi-layered and mutually reinforcing. Lack of evidence on manifestation of anti-Semitism, lack of data, impacts on states' legal duties and obligations and commitments. States face barriers when they are trying to prosecute anti-Semitic cases and punish the offenders, which leaves the victims without redress. And as hate crimes are message crimes, that mean not only the individual is harmed in an anti-Semitic hate crime, the impact goes towards the whole community. It sends a message that in this case, Jews are not welcome in the society. So if individuals are left without redress, that further increases the lack of trust that there will be justice, and can also further discourage reporting. Of course, and also to access to justice for the victims and for support. And generally, law enforcement and policymakers may underestimate the scale and the nature of anti-Semitism. Lack of data has impact on intelligence, policing, security. It's difficult for law enforcement without data to draw their conclusions about trends and threats and emerging issues. Same goes for policy making. How do you address prejudice if you don't know what form the prejudice has and how it manifests itself? And at the same time, it of course also impacts on how do you measure the effectiveness of your policies and if that you have in place, including police responses. So how can the data collection be improved? And this is my last slide. Corresponding to the 2 clusters that I mentioned in the beginning, which is the underreporting of victims and poor responsiveness of the systems, I have selected these few areas. So victims and witnesses need to be encouraged to step forward, and this can be done through building partnerships and mechanisms for structured cooperation between authorities, let's say police and civil society organizations. Victims, as I said, are reluctant to come forward and report. It might be easier for them to report their experience to community organizations or CSOs. In that case, if this is happening, then CSOs should have structured referrals. So they should have contacts with police and be able to refer the victim or the case to the police. CSOs have also better outreach to the communities that can be of benefit to the police for community policing, for example. There is a number of things quite concrete which can be done, and another one of them is to set up alternative reporting options that, however, need to be connected to victim support. So the agency just is working now on a report that is looking to why people are not reporting and what are the barriers and what are the drivers. And one thing that we come across is that if the victim reports but doesn't get any kind of, there is not a follow-up and here specifically a referral to victim support, the reporting itself loses its meaning. But online reporting tools such as email or apps and online portals are a way to disburden the process of reporting for victims. And regarding the responsiveness of the system, it was also mentioned here several times, build institutional capacity. In some states, it's a good practice to have specialized hate crime officers or units that deal with hate crime or with anti-Semitic hate crime, including training was mentioned here numerously. What we see also, practical police guidance is not a common tool across police organizations across the EU. The last point that I would make, how to improve the system, are looking at the IT systems, at the databases, and at the crime forms. This is what the FRA has been working on with states, together also with ODIHR, and we are basically auditing the police databases, and we are together with the national police, we are trying to make sure that the system has certain specificities in order that the bias motivation behind the crime, so anti-Semitism, for example, doesn't get lost. So we want the officer to be able to record that the crime was a potential hate crime, that the crime was potentially motivated by anti-Semitism, and we want the police officer to be able to be trained or to have available bias indicators, and in this case bias indicators on anti-Semitism, which tell him or her that attention needs to be paid, that this crime might have been motivated by anti-Semitism. This is from my side all. I'm happy to reply to any questions should you have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And I know we have come to rely on the FRA reporting. And so it's a reminder for all of us to both report and for the need for proper categorization and the reporting from all countries and member states. I just want to remind, because we have a couple more speakers, and then we will hopefully be able to open for questions. We already have some people who have requested the floor. Please address in the chat specifically to the 001 chat to be put on the list for speaking after the initial presentations. I'm now going to direct us to Dr. Jonathan Boyd, the Executive Director of the Institute for Jewish Policy Research. Dr. Boyd, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the organisers for the very kind invitation to be part of this discussion. I run the Institute for Jewish Policy Research. It's a social research institute and think tank that studies Jewish populations across Europe and beyond to help shape policy both within Jewish communities and among those outside Jewish communities who are committed to supporting Jewish life in a variety of ways. So research on anti-Semitism is very much part of our programme, but we've learned over time of the critical importance of examining it in multiple ways to make sense of what is actually going on in order to help inform the initiatives required to combat it. And I want to share some of those methods briefly in the time that I have. From all of the work that we've done over several decades now, and you can find it all on our website, jpr.org.uk, the first insight I want to share is a simple demographic one. 140 years ago, in 1881, about 9 in 10 of all Jews in the world lived in Europe, broadly understood. Today, that proportion is about 1 in 10. So Jews have left Europe or disappeared from Europe essentially for 2 reasons, either because of anti-Semitism or because life promised a better future somewhere else. And both as a Jew and as a Europhile, that troubles me deeply. I struggle to find a way to tell that story that reflects well on Europe, either as it was before the Second World War or in some respects since. The demographic data reveal a cold and harsh reality, that Europe as a whole has not been a continent in which Jewish life has really been able to flourish for a long time now. And I think we have to understand why. From a policy perspective, national governments in Europe and indeed across the OSCE region need to work out how best to protect and support the often demographically endangered Jewish communities that exist in their midst. But to do that, I think we need to evolve a much more sophisticated and coordinated multinational research agenda that allows us to continually measure what is going on. It's critical, of course, to gather anti-Semitic incident data, and obviously much work has been done in this area, and we've just heard a little bit about it, and much more still needs to be done. But I think it's also important to understand the limitations of such data. As Katerina just said, incident counts depend upon victims' willingness to report incidents that happen to them. And as these fluctuate and vary from place to place, incident data are a very imprecise way to measure change over time. There are simply too many other complicating factors in those data to make those judgments. Now, of course, that doesn't mean they have no value. Incident data tell us a great deal about the types of incidents that are occurring, who's perpetrating them, how wider social and political developments influence Jewish people's experiences of anti-Semitism. But they can only ever go so far. We need more information to make sense of the reality. So what other approaches are there? I think there's a great deal to learn from the work undertaken by the FRA, which has now run 2 major multinational studies of Jewish people's perceptions and experiences of anti-Semitism in several EU member states. Their value is clear. The studies provide us with an in-depth understanding of the Jewish perspective. Do victims of anti-Semitism report incidents when they occur? How anxious are people about experiencing anti-Semitism? What does anti-Semitism even look like to them? How do they describe it? The FRA's work in this area has genuinely been groundbreaking. So when the 3rd survey comes around in a couple of years' time, an agreement with the FRA should already be in place to somehow extend the research to all OSCE countries with sizable Jewish populations. Now, FRA research gives us the Jewish perspective, but we also need to understand wider society's views about Jews. The Anti-Defamation League has done remarkable work in this space with its Global 100, but actually the decision by the European Commission to use its Eurobarometer mechanism to investigate this is, to my mind, of greater policy significance. Its study, published in January 2019, gave us an in-depth understanding of the general public's views of Jews in all 28 EU member states. There were still 28 in those halcyon days. The results are interesting, of course, but the fact that the study was integrated into the Commission's work using its main data gathering mechanism, Eurobarometer, I think that was the real breakthrough. Because if nation states are really serious about combating anti-Semitism, they'll follow the European Commission's lead and use their own data gathering mechanisms to ensure that attitudes towards Jews are being examined in a regular, systematic and integrated manner. Lastly, let me return to demographic data. One of the best ways to monitor anti-Semitism is to watch demographic trends carefully. Given the history that I mentioned earlier, the tendency of Jews to vote with their feet is quite well established. So understanding whether this is continuing today, and if so, whether it's driven by anti-Semitism or other completely unrelated socioeconomic factors, is another critical way of monitoring what's going on. 2 years ago, we established a European Jewish Demography Unit at JPR, which is chaired by the world's leading Jewish demographer, Professor Sergio Della Pergola. So we're looking closely at this, but it's an initiative that needs support, not simply from the Jewish community, but from government to help it to feed essential demographic data into our shared understanding of anti-Semitism today. So in brief, from my vantage point, I believe there's an urgent need to take our data gathering processes more seriously. We need to expand the methods we're using to measure anti-Semitism, reaching beyond incident data to investigate Jewish people's views and experiences, wider society's attitudes, and key demographic trends, all in order to provide additional complementary perspectives. And I also think governments should be building these processes into their work wherever possible, so that the relationship between the research being done and the way in which it subsequently feeds into policy discussions is tighter, sharper, and better ingrained into national and international data gathering systems. That way, we ensure that both the data exist and that they are used to influence key policy decisions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Also interestingly thought about myself voting with my feet as a wandering Jew on the road, but I would like to dive in a little bit more also into the categorization when we have time later. And for our last speaker, I think we're really diving here from our general points about prevention to our experts in security with Johan Tynell, the Scandinavian Jewish Community Security Initiative. Our last speaker here. Johan, please.
Hi, you hear me now, I hope. Dear all, I'm going to try to make it as short as possible, but I'm going to use a PowerPoint presentation. So jump into it right away. Now, I was asked to share some insights upon how we see community security and resilience. And I'm going to talk shortly about 6 pillars of security, and I'm going to give an example of how a state can provide security and safety to its Jewish community. But before I start, I want us to go back in time to October 27th in 2018, when the synagogue Tree of Life was under attack in Pittsburgh. Är de hörde inget? Varför kommer inte nästa?
I believe the audio is missing, so if you can.
Audio is missing.
I think we can.
Vem hjälp mig? Det är ljud.
We can hear you.
You can hear me?
We can hear you. Just
Okay,
not
good.
the slides. You can continue.
Okay, but you could read it, I assume. The live session in reality for the dispatch center between the police officers were much longer, of course. But the bottom line is that the final message was the same. They were pinned down and they couldn't get any further. Meanwhile, Jews were murdered inside the synagogue. That day, 11 people lost their lives and 6 people got injured. And the slide you see in front of you is a fundament on how you can see upon security. It's a triangle. It's between the police, the physical security that's provided, and the community security. But in order to uphold this triangle, it's the state and the authorities that has the key to the solution, because all of them are only fulfilled if the support is given from the government. Now, the majority of Jewish children around in Europe, when they arrive to school, the first thing they see in the morning is either a security officer, a police officer, or a soldier. That doesn't mean that the threat, even though the threat has increased in the past decade against Europe, doesn't mean that it's high against the Jewish community, nor is it low. It's just that it's constant. It was constant when I was young. It's constant now when my children are young. And hopefully the history of tomorrow with your work will make it not as constant. The 6 pillars of security is divided like this: leadership, security organization, physical security, crisis management, security awareness, authorities, and partners. If we start with the leadership, everything starts with the leadership. If it's community leadership, it's the management of a law enforcement agency, or if it's the leadership of a state. They need to believe there is a need for security for the Jewish community. And if they do believe, the 2 key words to work with is commitment and involvement. Because if the leadership believes and gets involved, They will provide the fundamental needs in order for us to create security organizations. Doesn't matter if it's an old man in a small synagogue in a small village, or it's a full-fledged security organization like in France or UK as example. With physical security, it's the most costly one besides salaries for security staff. No one ever said that security is simple, because who wants to go through a double door system in order to pray? It should be, in the best of worlds, if the history of tomorrow was succeeding, I wouldn't be talking in front of you, you wouldn't host this seminar because it wasn't going to be needed, but this is not the reality. The crisis management, the principles for the community crisis management is built up of the resources within the community, meaning people are working as lawyers, doctors, psychologists, journalists. In times of crisis, they are using their skills to provide and support guidance to the community to get back to reality as soon as possible, or normality. You, as authorities and organizations, you will help us to survive, but you won't make us survive. The security awareness. Today, I would say it's almost in the DNA of the Jewish communities. If anyone grasps the term of, if you see something, say something, I think the communities are the ones that has taken it most to them. And we drill. And here is from the attack in 2015 in Copenhagen, in the Bat Mitzvah party. From 1 second dancing and drinking to listening to the security officer, asking them to go down to the shelter and go to lockdown. If it had happened in any other place in the city at the same time, I'm quite sure the result wouldn't have been as effective as it was. If it starts with the political leadership of the community and the state, you can say the circle is closed by the authorities and the co-partners such as yourself. Because without your support, interaction, we heard mentioning how the police are going to use the IRA definition. We heard before how already the British police have integrated it. Co-working partners as the religious interfaith Amana in Sweden, as an example, with Rabbi Moshe David HaKohen, who is having fruitful conversations with the Muslim parties to bridge anti-Semitism in Malmö. Now I'm going to shortly just mentioning the Danish model, because we as a community in Denmark had the same situation as many other communities in Europe until the attack. Maybe we would have police support, maybe we wouldn't. The moments after the shots were fired at the synagogue, everything changed. We have achieved to have police 24/7 protecting the Jewish facilities and events. We have financial support for physical security at all installations. We receive annual grants to uphold the community security organization. And at the moment, they're working on a national action plan on combating anti-Semitism. But this is not what is the Danish model, because all these 4 parameters are done in all the other countries in Europe at the moment. What is special and why it's called the Danish model is how the adaptive attitude by integrating the police with the community security. In the triangle, you see the police officers inside the control room of the Jewish community. They operated 24/7 together. Their plans are ours, our plans are theirs. The national radio system that is used by the EMS and the police and law enforcement, they also just put us on the same. So we have a capability, if needed, to talk directly to police over the radios. They having, instead of making the mail screening for us to do it ourselves, they put us in the same category as the Danish government, and all mail that is going to any Jewish facility in Denmark is screened by the security department. We had problems setting up CCTV cameras. They changed the Danish law so we would be able to adjust it. Now, shortly, I will give you my 4 takeaways for you. Recognizing the crucial responsibility of a political leadership, recognizing the security as a quality of life issue. Because why should children see an armed protector or police officer the first thing they see? But if it's needed, please make it happen. And adapting the strategies and security needs to the communities. Ask them, what do you need? And lastly, adapting the IRA definition, not only in the strategy, but to integrate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Really a reality check and bringing things to the ground. And one important thing you noted is this cooperation and close cooperation between the Jewish community and the authorities and the leadership. Thanks for bringing that forward. I believe we're closing our list for remarks. We have a few speakers, but states who wish to exercise their right to reply may still request to do so by chat to 001 speakers list. I'll now open the floor to the participants. Just a reminder to not exceed 3 minutes, and also turn on your microphone, your camera, and clearly state your name and delegation you represent or organization. And first, I give the floor here to Ms. Karen McDonald from the USA, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm Karen McDonald, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. I'm grateful to the Swedish Chair, Foreign Minister Linda, for this early opportunity to underscore the Biden administration's deep commitment to combating anti-Semitism. In commemoration of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, President Biden stated, "We must never forget the truth or brush aside the horrors inflicted on our fellow humans because of hatred and division. Too many governments cold-bloodedly implemented hate-fueled laws, policies, and practices to vilify and dehumanize entire groups of people, and too many individuals stood by silently. Silence is complicity. My country and others represented here have witnessed appalling anti-Semitic attacks, as Johan just highlighted. We must take deadly seriously the violence and dangerous lies that often undergird anti-Semitism. Jewish communities live in daily fear for their safety. We must always counter lies with facts and answer crimes of hate with justice. Anti-Semitism cuts across, as we've discussed, ideology, political party, group, and nation. So our efforts have to be comprehensive and they have to be relentless. We must forge coalitions of conscience with civil society organizations and the private sector to work across diverse communities and faiths. We must also understand that Jewish communities in some countries are threatened by bans on ritual slaughter and male circumcision, as Rabbi Baker pointed out. While the motivation of most who support these laws may not be anti-Semitism, such measures make it difficult, if not impossible, for Jews to practice their faith and can result in their exodus. We must learn to recognize anti-Semitism in its many forms. The Biden administration embraces IRA's working definition, a valuable tool, and we commend ODIHR for using it. We urge all that haven't done so to do likewise. No society is immune from anti-Semitism, particularly when hate mongers misuse the internet to spew bile with unprecedented speed and reach. Outrageous conspiracy theories have proliferated, as noted, falsely blaming Jews for COVID-19. We must oppose those who traffic in pernicious stereotypes to promote their agendas or for their political gain. Attempts also continue to rehabilitate long-dead anti-Semites and hold them up as heroes to new generations. We must reject every effort to deny, distort, or diminish the Holocaust. We applaud Germany, the IRA chair, for initiating a global task force against Holocaust distortion. The work of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and its special representative on anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance, US Senator Ben Cardin, enriches the OSCE's tolerance efforts, as does cooperation among the COE's ICRI, the EU's Agency for Fundamental Rights, and ODIHR. As ODIHR's path-breaking program, Turning Words into Action, addresses other forms of intolerance, we look to ODIHR to ensure that its vital anti-Semitism work maintains focus. I look forward to working with all of you to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of intolerance. I applaud the Swedish chair and personal representative, Rabbi Baker, for their leadership. Thank you, Madam Moderator, for giving me the floor.
Thank you, and thank you for participating. Good luck to the new administration in your work. I now give the floor to Ms. Anna Washitskaya from the Russian Jewish Congress. Anna, please.
Hello, thank you so much. The Russian Jewish Congress for many years has been systematically working both to counter anti-Semitism and to prevent its growth. The main areas of our activities in combating anti-Semitism in Russia are daily monitoring, big-scale sociological research on the level of anti-Semitism in Russia. We've just received the results of the latest one. It wasn't published yet, but we are planning to send it out at the end of February. And the biennial conference on combating xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and racism. Hopefully we will invite you there at the end of November. And also these are educational projects aimed at preserving the memory of the Holocaust against the glorification of Nazism. Just to mention, the biggest project in this regard is Memory Week, that is cultural, educational, and memorial events that are held in Russia around the International Holocaust Remembrance Day and the anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz by the Red Army. This year, supported by state and regional authorities, more than 1,000 events took place in 74 regions on and offline. But today, I would like to focus on the culture projects. We totally believe that by spreading projects about Jewish culture, literature, history, art, including what was destroyed by the Nazis, we are thus preventing anti-Semitism and working to reduce xenophobia in general, including opposition to the glorification and rehabilitation of Nazi ideology. For reaching this purpose, we have launched 2 regular grant competitions. The first one is for exhibition projects and museum initiatives and takes place once a year. There were 17 winners in 2 years. As a result, we got amazing exhibition projects in the largest museums in the country. These projects receive huge media coverage. They are visited, people read about them, and what is especially important, this way we address non-Jewish audience throughout the country, including Muslim regions. As an example, Bromberg's violent project made by Memorial Center about anti-Semitic campaigns in USSR in the 1940s, 50s. Opening the synagogue, the project is dedicated to the heritage of the Jewish community of the city of Buynaksk, Dagestan. And the third competition, which will start in February, will also launch a separate line of grants for online exhibitions. Another program is a quarterly competition for any projects related to Jewish culture other than museum activities. There are books, plays, performances, online projects, movies, etc. As a part of this project, we supported the International Festival of Jewish Cinema, a festival of the movies about the Holocaust, and the play named The Black Book of Esther, which tells the history of Holocaust through Purim Shpol. This performance, which was released in November, was already nominated for major theater awards. An important point here is that every event like this is associated with educational programs, seminars, webinars, lectures, discussions with both children and adults to provide a deeper understanding of the material and to develop tolerance. We really believe that culture projects with an integration of educational programs contribute a lot to solving the problem of xenophobia and preventing anti-Semitism, allowing us to reach a great non-Jewish audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding us that the positive aspects in culture and fighting anti-Semitism. I now give the floor to a representative from Azerbaijan, Mr. Rahim Rahimov.
Yes.
Yes, please also present yourself.
I'm Rahim Rahimov from Baku International Multiculturalism Center in Baku, Azerbaijan. Dear organizers and colleagues, as we understand, anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial are global issue or problem that sometimes leads or even misleads us to seeking global or universal solutions. However, we have to register that local context or local considerations are absolutely significant. That's why we have to kind of globalize our approach to fighting anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. To illustrate my point, what I mean by globalization of our approach to combat anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, I'll give you an example from the case of Azerbaijan. In Azerbaijan, the two topics, anti-Semitism and Holocaust, are mandatory in all universities, public and private, and for all students of humanities, natural sciences, and of all other subjects. And in these topics are all authored intendedly by Azerbaijani scholars of Jewish origin, because when they prepare these materials, they take into consideration the local context. They are Jews. It is passionate for them to write this topic, but on the other side, they are citizens of Azerbaijan and they know the local context. And for these subjects, we have two books. I showed them. Just you can see one of them specifically multicultural anti-Semitism. You can see it. In these topics, we give a general, a basic understanding what anti-Semitism is and what Holocaust is. But at the end of the materials, we give kind of a few lines that acts as a hook between global understanding of anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial and its connection to local population, to local context. We try to explain why this global issue is relevant for us. In Azerbaijan, we don't speak about China, about America, about Europe, why it is relevant for our population, for our youth. And this hook makes effective our combating, proactively addressing these issues. I personally teach these topics at Azerbaijan State Marine Academy, and on daily basis in the classrooms, auditoriums, I see how these local hooks, local context act as appealing. So to sum up my presentation, I again reiterate that local contexts are important and we have to register or even prioritize local considerations in our approach to combating anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for also bringing the concept of glocalizing. We can look at as well. I believe we're very short on time. We have a few representatives still requesting to speak, and we're not sure that we're going to get through all of them. And you can still send notes for the minutes and for the reporting to the OSCE directly to be included in the report from this meeting. So if you wish to, please do so. Lastly, we will go to a representative from Ukraine, Mr. Alexander Hanichenko, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moderator. Good evening, dear ladies and gentlemen. As a delegation of Ukraine, I represent the permanent mission of Ukraine to the OSCE, and I would like to take this opportunity to commend the Swedish OSCE chairpersonship for organizing this important expert meeting on the topic of combating anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic hate crimes, which unfortunately remains highly relevant for the OSCE area. The government of Ukraine attaches great significance to the promotion of tolerance, mutual respect, and understanding within the Ukrainian society. And the topic of prevention of combating discrimination is comprehensively addressed by the national legislation, including the Human Rights Strategy of Ukraine, which provide for further development of an efficient system at national and local levels, including legal protection, awareness raising, and educational programs, as well as statistical data collection. The Ukrainian authorities consistently and decisively oppose any kinds of anti-Semitic, racist, and xenophobic manifestations. All these disgraceful phenomena are banned by the Ukrainian law and rejected by the public at large. Unfortunately, today across the OSCE area, we are witnessing an alarming rise and new manifestations of anti-Semitism, along with other forms of intolerance. And we must also actively resist disinformation and propaganda as modern and powerful weaponry in hybrid wars. Intolerance and discriminations are not only a violation of human dignity, but also a threat to open and democratic societies, and thereby to their stability and security. And recognizing this truth, the OSCE participating states have developed a comprehensive framework of commitments to combat intolerance and discriminations, including those to counter anti-Semitism and related forms of racism and xenophobia. To conclude, I would like to say that for the OSCE and our common activities, it is, we believe that it is long overdue to adopt a working definition of anti-Semitism endorsed by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. We regret that in the past few years, it has not been possible due to the objection of one participating state who demonstrates full disregard to all OSCE core principles and values. And of course, we encourage the Swedish OSCE chairpersonship to steer the efforts of our organization towards the adoption of respective OSCE documents. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time is up and we must finish our session today. I know, again, I'll mention that those who have requested remarks are able to send them, and remind everybody that there is also a session tomorrow, which will look closer into this issue of coalition building, which has come a few times today. Before finishing for today, I want to say thank you, first of all, to our speakers, to all participants and viewers, of course, to the organizers of these sessions, and to our interpreters who have been working hard for the past couple of hours to make sure everybody can follow the session. I think in these 2 hours, we really went through the top of prevention all the way from the idea of social cohesion and treating anti-Semitism as a human rights issue, which is one thing that I know the World Jewish Congress has been promoting on the international and on the local level as well, and all the way to projects on the ground, the daily security needs and the dire need for cooperating and working with the Jewish communities and the leadership in the countries and in these international organizations on these issues. There's a lot more to unpack in everything that's been said today, but in terms of time, I thank you again. Thank you, Ulrika, and I give you back the floor. And I'll exercise my right to say you need to unmute yourself for the first time today. Ulrika.